transparency, accountability, membership engagement.
We don't even have band meetings anymore, regular band meetings. People don't know what's going on.
How does that make you feel?
Oh man, almost hopeless most times.
Turns out that there was actually none of the disclosure required under the First Nation Financial Transparency Act occurring. There was essentially a 5-year period where there was no financial accountability or financial transparency.
We don't need to answer to Canada, but we do need to answer to our membership because we need to know where our money's going.
I have all his info here.
This is the ancestral land of the Stoney Nakota. In the Stoney Nakota language, Iahe means people of the mountain. This place is called Iyamnuthka, or flat-faced mountain. Nakota people believe strong winds at the top are a sign of powerful spirits who live not only here, but all over the sacred peaks of the Rocky Mountains. It's understood that ceremony should be performed before venturing into the mountains, or the spirits may be angered. Now known as southern Alberta, the Stoney Nakota still live in the foothills here. And the wind from the mountains often roars through with incredible force, almost as if the spirits are expressing dismay. Until recently, Pauline Tu Youngman lived in Good Stoney First Nation all her life. Now, instead of seeing her son every day, she speaks to him on the phone.
Okay, I left my reserve 2019. We moved out. Because of JR's being sick, my husband, he was sick and he ended up in the hospital. And then after the surgery, we stayed there for a bit, almost a month. And then the doctor want him to go home to a good environment. And I told the doctor, our house is condemned. This is what they said on the report. The cement is cracked. The moist coming through there and mold up the walls and the washroom. And
Pauline shared a report from Indigenous Services Canada with APTN Investigates. After a housing inspection was done in 2019 at her residence, she and her husband were forced to leave their home and community for the first time. For them, living in a nearby town has come with its own challenges.
The struggle we have is money. We pay the rent, utilities, and the insurance. And that leaves us with only few dollars left for our food. But sometimes, ever since we moved here, when there's no money left, we have to go just one meal a day.
Among the other documents Tu Youngman showed us was a lawyer's letter addressed to the Good Stoney chief and CEO. It asks that they be given priority for renovations. It was sent over a year ago, and they have not received a response.
I have concerns.
Pauline and her husband JR aren't the only ones expressing their discontent.
Transparency, accountability, membership engagement.
At a recent meeting, many of these concerns were echoed by 24 other Stoney Nakota members. But one issue kept coming up over and over again.
Even this, look, they took it off, and
The poor state of people's homes.
this, it fell off. So,
It just fell off.
yeah, and the heat doesn't come out.
APTN Investigates was flooded with requests to visit houses in Stoney Nakota territory.
I've been really asking for renovation for past 20 years, maybe more.
To see for ourselves the number of houses in disrepair.
I don't know what happened, but they broke the window and we had to do this.
So has it been like this all winter?
Like for 2-3 years now.
2-3 years?
Yes.
Broken windows,
Here, it's taped up from the top all the way to the bottom like this because it fell. It was like this. This one too.
broken
This one, too,
doors,
it's not closing. If you like lock it, that's the only way it's gonna keep it closed. Other than that, if you unlock it, then it's gonna like what you just saw. It's gonna keep opening. See, like that.
broken floors.
That's right, see that? It's kind of bubbled up at the walls.
The 3 homes we visited all had been waiting years for renos that never came. Brandon Soldier says 15 people live here.
We got nowhere else to go, so we got to stay here.
There, that's where it started. The water started coming out.
And the disrepair is affecting people's health.
So there's like mold coming over here too. These are all mold. My grandson, it has asthma. And ever since he's been here, all I can hear is just him coughing, puffing and puffing and puffing and puffing.
Then there's a whole lot of mold over here in the corner that where mostly the smell generates from. You can just smell it. It doesn't like it hurts when I breathe sometimes.
One common thread we heard through these visits: anger and despair towards the band council over a lack of urgency to take action.
We tried many times, so then nothing really happens going forward, and so we kind of gave up on it.
How does that make you feel?
Oh man, I'm almost hopeless most times.
Meanwhile, elders like Pauline feel like they're being treated better in their adopted non-Stoney Nakota community than by their own band council.
They brought us in furnitures and pots and pans and dishes. They're good to us. And sometimes they know that we're struggling. They bring us food.
She points to leadership being responsible for on-reserve issues such as housing. Good Stoney is one of 3 bands that are a part of the Stoney Nakota Nation. Over the years, and through different leadership administrations, the names of these nations have changed. But today, Good Stoney, Chiniki, and the Bear's Paw bands all make up the Stoney Nakota Nation.
Hey, are you
Hi.
Kenny?
Yes, I'm Kenny.
Hey, I'm Brittany.
Hi.
Nice to meet
Kenny
you.
Hunter is a member of the Good Stoney First Nation.
Back in the old days, I think there was less political opposition because it seemed like at that time people lived in harmony. But nowadays we don't even have band meetings anymore, regular band meetings. People don't know what's going on.
Let's just start from the beginning. How did this all come to be?
For years, Hunter has tried to get financial transparency for Good Stoney First Nation.
I think the government structure here within our own community is confusing because we don't know who's in charge of what.
In cities and towns, you can call 311, where you'll be directed to the specific department you need information about. But on the res, where can you go for financial transparency? Stoney Nakota leadership did not respond to our interview requests.
I like watching my mountains every morning. Every time I get up, I always see my mountains. My dad used to say, one day those mountains are going to flatten. They're not going to be like that, he said.
Muriel LaBelle comes from a long line of Bear's Paw chiefs. Her father and grandfather both served in the administration for decades.
My dad was a chief for Bear's Paw for 14 years and 13 years in Chin as a counselor. And he has all these papers that says the election regulation, what was done, all of that. I have all his info here. There.
Equipped with her dad's knowledge of the system,
There's a lot of stuff that were in here.
and an entire archive of historical band documents. LaBelle said she felt something wasn't right with the 2018 election. She appealed the decision, but it didn't go as she hoped. It's how she met Kenny Hunter, and their goal? To gain financial transparency for their nations.
Kenny was the first one that called me and asked me about how I went with my appeal. And I told him it might be better if we, all of the three of us work together and get this thing going.
This was given to me by Muriel LaBelle, who's...
Hunter and LaBelle teamed up with Wanda Ryder to take legal action. The trio each represents the three nations of Stoney Nakota. A major concern for the group is the soaring costs for the nation's 3 chiefs and 15 counselors. Paul Reed is their lawyer.
The main problem that they were dealing with was the fact that they didn't feel like they could get any financial information from chief and council of either the constituent First Nations or the band itself. On the Canadian government website, there wasn't any financial disclosure occurring there, and it turns out that there was actually none of the disclosure required under the First Nation Financial Transparency Act occurring. Essentially a 5-year period where there was no financial accountability, no financial transparency.
First Nation citizens should have the same basic access to the financial statements of their governments and information on the salaries of their elected officials, as all other Canadians expect from their federal, provincial, and municipal leaders.
The First Nations Financial Transparency Act was introduced by the Stephen Harper government in 2013. It requires First Nations to publicly disclose their consolidated financial statements, as well as a schedule of the salaries and expenses.
Democracy does depend on citizens being able to call their elected leaders to account.
For fans of transparency, it all sounded promising.
Together we are the Assembly of First Nations.
But at the time, many First Nations leaders accused the Conservatives of not consulting First Nations about the law.
Sunny ways, my friends, sunny ways.
After his election in 2015, Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party stopped enforcing the Transparency Act.
Because he is the Prime Minister. An AFN jacket, so he's gonna...
Since then, the Liberals have been working with the Assembly of First Nations to replace the Act with something else that promotes, quote, mutual accountability. After more than 8 years, the Act is in a holding pattern, not being actively enforced, nor improved with a different law. In 2017, an Indigenous Services report recommended repealing the First Nations Transparency Act. In 2019, a joint AFN and Indigenous Services Committee put out a report with 24 recommendations, including the creation of a First Nations Auditor General. When asked for an update on this file, Indigenous Services says, quote, co-development is intensive and requires resources and engagement to build consensus, meaning that it will take a number of years for all recommendations to be fully addressed. LaBelle says since the Liberals came to power, she's noticed a change.
It seems like everything has been different, so don't bother them or anything. Even my oldest daughter was saying, she was living in Vancouver, and said, Mom, how come, what is it that's keeping you here? You should move out and have a life. She said, no, I was born here, I was raised here. I'm used to my own land, my reserve.
So who does the band leadership answer to? To find out, APTN Investigates is taking a look inside the band office. Nestled in the valleys of the Rocky Mountains, these waterways have connected the Stoney Nakota nations for generations. For as long as anyone can remember, the Yahe Nakota have harvested plants here.
The elders would take us when it's berry picking time. The older ladies would tell us stories, and then they would teach the younger ladies about what is coming up for them in motherhood and womanhood. Like that old saying, every community raises a child. It saddens me that When I talk to the younger people, they will say, oh, I don't have anything to do. There's nothing for me. I don't even want to be here when I'm 40.
A lot of these graves are fresh graves from last year or since 2020.
Kenny Hunter says the Stoney Nakota are in the midst of an opioid crisis. He says a lack of housing exasperates the problem.
It's just sad that a lot of these fresh graves of young people, you know, they could have been alive today. You know, what could have been done, you know, to address this?
Between 2015 and 2021, the life expectancy for First Nations people plunged 7 years in Alberta, due in part to drug poisoning deaths. Hunter laments that it wasn't until October that a new treatment center opened in Stoney Nakota territory, and that many of the newer graves here are not for those who died of natural causes.
There's been a rapid number of young people that have died in the city because of drug overdose.
So we put that on.
Wanda Ryder is a member of the Bearspaw Nation. She says the issues in Stoney Nakota are complex. But she would like to know how the Band Council's royalties from oil and gas are being spent.
I agree that we don't need to answer to Canada, but we do need to answer to our membership because we need to know where our money's going.
Ryder teamed up with Kenny Hunter and Muriel LaBelle to get Stoney Nakota to release all 5 years of missing financial records.
I feel like it saddens me that I had to go this length when we could have just sat down in a meeting and they could have just shared their knowledge.
Their lawyer, Paul Reed, was game to take their case on from the get-go, but is also surprised he had to get involved in the first place.
You know, from my perspective, it would have been easier to simply comply rather than to resist.
APTN Investigates reviewed all financial disclosures published online by Indigenous Services Canada. Out of the 576 First Nations required to publish their financial records, 65% did not comply.
If the band has failed to follow the provisions of the legislation, then you have a legislative recourse.
After some back and forth discussions between the two parties and thousands of dollars in legal fees, the agreement was reached to release missing documents under the First Nations Financial Transparency Act.
In many of the instances, the expenses claimed by the members of Chief and Council were, equal to or greater than the salaries they were being paid.
There is no accountability. There is no transparency.
But should it be this difficult for members to get financial transparency?
They gave us the records. It had to take a subpoena for them to release it.
One thing the documents revealed: the outgoing Chief and Council receive a severance check when they are not re-elected. According to court documents, the nation agreed to pay leadership members severance going back as far as 2005. But the only year Chief and Council disclosed severance pay is for 2022, to the tune of nearly $350,000. It's unknown just how much has been paid for members who are ousted. We asked the band for an interview to discuss financial transparency and just how much the nation has paid in severance since the policy was introduced. Chief and Council did not respond to our repeated interview requests.
For us as First Nations members, it's really hard to get proof and to get evidence because everything's so confidential, everything is so hush-hush.
So if you can't get answers from leadership, then there aren't many options left for band members.
And the public has a right to know how our money is being spent. Who are they answering to? That's what I'd like to know.
The self-sufficiency ratio looks at self-generated revenue divided by total expenses.
Bettina Schneider is an associate professor at the First Nations University in Regina. She teaches a course on financial literacy for Indigenous peoples.
Any member should be able to understand how their government is managing finances, making financial decisions on their behalf.
She says in some cases, there may be a good reason why a First Nations financial disclosure is slow. But she adds it's still important for any government to be accountable and transparent to the people. And there are signs to look for.
When you see trends going back 5, 10, 15 years, and you see, for example, limited growth, you see, limited self-generated revenues over a long period of time, it's going to cause you to question what's happening.
Schneider says First Nations that disclose their financial information aren't just being accountable to the people.
It's something that gives confidence to investors. It lowers transaction costs. That not having that information more widely or readily available creates for investors.
APTN Investigates asked for an interview with Indigenous Services Canada to discuss the future of the Transparency Act. But in an email, a spokesperson said they couldn't facilitate an interview. In a written statement, they did provide one little-known course of action. If you belong to one of the over 300 First Nations that does not have its own financial administration law, you can make an access to information request to Indigenous Services Canada for financial information.
It strains relationships between community members, between their government, when there is no clear way forward. And so I understand consultation takes time and agreement takes time, but I think we risk further damaging those relationships.
It's said that the Stoney Nakota come from the mountains, and at the end of time, they will return. But for now, Pauline Two Youngman and her husband would just like to return to the foothills where they once lived, except there's no telling when or if their house will ever be fixed.
I do get sad, but what can you do? Nothing. We're retired, and if we are making like everybody else, we could go and fix our house, but not anymore. Sometimes I wonder, do they ever think about us elders being out here instead of being an elder out there on the reserve? People forget about us.